A great way to improve the user experience on your website is just by taking kind of like one element and adding something delightful or surprising to it. If you've been following along, I've been doing a video series on designing and developing the New City Eastlake website, developing it in Webflow while you guys follow along. And the first video, we created these two buttons. While these buttons are pretty fun, they've got lively color fills and a nice hover state. I thought that I could do something even more unique and, like I said, delightful for the user. So in this video, we're going to be creating these buttons. Now, I've never seen a button like this on any website. It's almost kind of strange. And the reason that I did this was because of this sign. So this is a really large sign that sits outside of our church. It's on the front lawn. So anybody that drives to our church or drives past it, they see this sign. And so these kind of like staggered squares are just part of the brand, and they always have been. And so I wanted to create buttons that just kind of mimicked that staggered square effect a little bit and really made this website feel like this is a really custom experience. All right, so let's dig into Webflow and start creating these buttons. So we're gonna pop into Webflow and I'm gonna start creating this button. I'm gonna use a link block because I wanna make sure that since this is like a custom button, it still has the clickable element to it. All right, so I'm gonna call it interactive button. All right, and I know from designing these other buttons that these buttons are actually 190 pixels tall, and they have 9 pixels of padding at the top and bottom. All right, so if I add a piece of text to my interactive button, and then go ahead and give it visit us, we can start styling the text. So I know that our buttons were actually 13 point. They had 1 pixel of letter spacing. They were not that blue, which is kind of like the default color for all links. They were all caps. They did not have the underline, and they were center aligned. I think I'm missing something. Oh, the font weight. I think it was medium. Let's check that out. Yes. All right, perfect. All right, so we're getting pretty close. Next is I'm gonna add a fresh div block and set its position to absolute and fill the entire container. You'll notice that up here, div block is at the top left and it's filling the entire viewport. And that's because if you look here at the next to the target symbol, the next available parent element that has a positioning of relative is what this absolutely position element is targeting. So the way to fix that is if I click on my interactive button and make it relative, all of a sudden now the element that we just added is going to sit inside of this button only. All right, so let's grab this and we're going to rename it. Instead of calling it div block, we'll call it interactive button flex parent. Perfect. We're going to go ahead and flex it, and that looks okay. Then we're going to add a fresh div block, and we'll call this button flex child, just to keep it a little shorter. And I want it to only be 100% height and expand the entire width. All right, and then if I duplicate that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I want there to be 5 blocks. And then a couple of more things in terms of styling. I want it to have that blue background. And I also want it to be, when we style the interactions, we're going to be using the scale function. And so I want it to scale not from the middle, I want it to scale from the bottom. All right. And then maybe the last thing I'll do is you'll see that the boxes are currently over the text. We can use z-index to address that. So we'll give the flex parent a z index of 1, and then the text block will make that position relative so that we have access to the z index, and we'll make it z index 2. All right, and that's kind of like artificially giving it a stacking order and saying you're kind of putting it on a plane so that it shows up above anything below it. All right, so now it's time to go ahead and start styling our interactions. So with the interactive button selected, I'm going to click on the interactions tab, I should say, and make the trigger mouse over. That means when the mouse hovers over this element, some sort of interaction will happen. So I'm going to start an animation, and I'm going to call it interactive button hover on, because later on we'll do hover off. All right, perfect. Then I'm going to select my first one here. And something I forgot to do is I'm going to move out of there, is these all need to have their own class name. You'll see why in a second, but let's go ahead and take care of that. I'm going to duplicate the class and just call this button child 2. Duplicate class. This is going to be 3. Duplicate class 4, and one more, and we'll be done. This is going to be number 5. All right, so back to it. On interactive button, go to the interactions tab. And now if I click on the first square, I can start styling the interaction. So I'm going to click on scale, and we're going to make sure that these two are unlinked, and I want it to scale up a little bit. So I'm going to do 1.15. And essentially, actually let's do 1.2. What that's doing is it's increasing the scale of the button by 20%. And remember, we set kind of the origin of any interactions to the bottom, so it's going 20% up. So I think you can kind of see where I'm going now. This one we'll set to scale, and we're going to set this to 0.9. Actually, before I do that, let's make sure to unlink this and do 0.9. All right. The middle button, I'm actually gonna, or middle rectangle, I'm gonna leave alone, and I'm gonna skip over to the flex child 4, add a scale, unlink the properties, and I'm gonna scale this to, the previous one was 0.9, I think we said, so we'll do 0.8. Maybe 0.85 just to make sure Visit Us is still nice and readable. And then number 5 is our last one. We'll add a fresh scale, unlink the properties, and we'll make this maybe 1.1. If I click on the last one, you'll kind of see, you get a sense for how all of them will be laid out. All right, next is I want to customize the timing of these interactions, because right now it's set to linear, and it's going to take 0.5 seconds to achieve that interaction. And 0.5 seconds sounds like it's not a lot of time, but in the world of interactions, it's a lot of time. It's just going to make the interaction feel really slow and sluggish. So 0.2 is actually better, and I want to set it to ease. So we'll do that to all of our interactions. I'm not sure if ease is the one that I'll end up using. That's kind of where I want to start out. All right, awesome. Next is I want to create the hover off animation. And it's important to do that because right now, if I hovered over the button in preview mode, the boxes would go ahead and get staggered. But then when I hovered off of the button with the mouse, they would still remain staggered. So you want them to kind of go back to their original setting. All right, so start animation. We're going to add a fresh one. Call it interactive button hover off. All right, so we're going to kind of essentially do the same thing and scale everything back to normal. And let's go ahead and set our timing right away. right, separate the dimensions, go back to 1, duration of 0.2 seconds, and let's ease. All right, 2 more. Skipping over number 3, we're gonna add scale, separate the dimensions, back to 1, and it's gonna take 0.2 seconds, and ease. All right, and last element, oops. There we go. Last element, scale, separate the dimensions, back to 1, and 0.2 seconds, and ease. All right, and then the very last thing I'll do is, currently the way this is set up is that all of these interactions will affect only the selected element. So down here you'll see select element is what's being targeted. And in case we ever copy and duplicate this button, we actually want it not to affect the selected element, but any siblings, any children of the parent element with the class. Hopefully that's not too confusing, but I want it to affect the class and only children with this class. And by children, it means the interaction is being attached to the interactive button. And because the flex child is inside of the interactive button div, we want only children to be affected. So let's go ahead and apply that to all of our interactions. All right, and I think we need to do that with our hover on as well. Class. Sorry for the delay here. I know in YouTube, if you tap the, if you're on your phone, if you tap the right of the screen twice, I believe it kind of like fast forwards 10 seconds. All right, awesome. So I think we're done. Let's go ahead into preview mode and check this out. Love that. I think that I might tweak that a little bit from here on out, and maybe have these, maybe have everything grow a little bit instead of having it come down, because I kind of don't like how Visit Us starts to lose some of that top padding. But anyways, I'm going to stop there, and I'll make sure to put a link to the preview URL for Webflow. And what that means is that you can actually go into the this part of kind of like the dashboard of Webflow, and you can take a look at the animations and change it, or I think you may even be able to copy and duplicate the button now that you can copy between projects. So I hope this was just kind of like a fun experiment where you were encouraged to do some things that were unique and custom and just felt like special to your project. And that's something that's going to be delightful to your users. So thanks so much for hanging out, and talk to you guys soon.